This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And make sure to order Jamie Glazov's new critically acclaimed jihadist psychopath, how he is charming, seducing, and devouring us. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Bernie's Commie Craze and the lies and horror it's based on. With us this evening, Clare Lopez of Lopez Liberty, LLC. Clare, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm glad to be with you.
It's an honor to have you back. Clare, Bernie Sanders, I don't know how we can measure it exactly, but he seems to be having quite a bit of success in the, presidential race, the Democrat side of it. It's absolutely, well, I don't know if it's incredible, but I'm being rhetorical. It's not incredible in the sense of we know how successful the left has been in brainwashing the American population and the yearning in human nature for utopia unless a person is wise and knowledgeable and courageous, and we'll get to that in this discussion. But quite success. Bernie is, getting quite a bit of support. Let's just begin with this, Clare. What do you make of it?
It's quite a phenomenon for an old white guy like that to be so popular among the younger, the millennial generation. And I think it's because he promises them things. You called it utopia. He promises them things that they want and do not fundamentally understand how are created in society. That is to say, how wealth is created, how stuff is created, how things have to be paid for by someone and someone's labor. They don't yet know that, but he gives them the hope that they can have all this for free. And it's quite a phenomenon to watch, but I think it's also very dangerous. And I also think that in some measure, my generation perhaps, we have failed in some measure, to educate our young people about what socialism, communism, Marxism really are.
No, absolutely. We know that the virus, of course, began with the pretension to equality with Satan, in terms of his jealousy of God and wanting to be God. In some respects, we can see Cain's murder of Abel as the first communist revolution in the sense of the pretension to equality. And we know that this virus has affected humans throughout history. And in the 20th century, boy, did we see its effects. We saw what the Soviet killing fields did, what the Maoist killing fields did, what the Khmer Rouge killing fields did, what Castro's killing fields did. What a horrifying history of the Marxist idea in its earthly incarnations. And yet Bernie Sanders traveled to the Soviet Union in 1988 on his honeymoon, and he celebrated the Soviet killing fields. He traveled to Castro's Cuba in '89 and celebrated Cuba's killing fields. This guy is a supporter of monstrosity. He's a supporter of the idea that led to the murder of more than 100 million people in the 20th century. And yet his ideas are receiving so much support in this country.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is a bit puzzling, at least to us, and certainly to people like you whose own background informs you better than maybe many of the rest of us what this really is. But here's the thing, it's this yearning for that utopia. It's a yearning for what can never be, but which seems so attractive. Everybody's equal, nobody has more than anybody else. And yet when we think about human nature, the reason, the real reason that a free market capitalist system works is because it harnesses what may be, in its worst expression, defects in America or in human nature, that being acquisitiveness and ambition and wanting to get ahead. Now, those things can be both good and not good, depending on whether they are moderated, whether they're regulated. But the genius of the capitalist system is that it harnesses those aspects of human nature that, properly regulated, lead to prosperity for the whole of society, while socialism, which ultimately is going to lead to communism, it's Marxism, it's about government control. It is about the government and the societal control of the individual and the crushing of individual liberty, which goes against human nature, and which is why it always leads in the end to the kinds of horrific killing fields that you just talked about there, Jamie, because people don't like it, and they have to be coerced, and in the end, it winds up killing millions upon millions of people.
Well, absolutely. And look, I just thought I would say when Sanders visited the Soviet Union in '88, you know, they've also got video clips of him singing over there and, you know, praising the Soviet regime. You know, he also made some statements about his visit, and he was just so, you know, enchanted with the Soviet public transportation system. You know, that's one of the things he was railing about. You know, the trains were running on time, you know, even though that's not true. But for me and for so many, what was interesting is he didn't want and he didn't ask to visit the Sharanskys, the Bukovskys, the Solzhenitsyns, the Shalamovs that might be in prison now. In terms of the timeline, those individuals might not have been in prison at that moment. I'm using them symbolically. But he didn't ask to go visit the dissidents that were languishing in the Soviet gulag. And so these kind of individuals, like Bernie Sanders, they don't really care about the people suffering, to which also you just alluded to, the victims of that terror.
No, they never do. And deceit has to be a part of it, because if the truth about this system and what it does to the human spirit, to individual liberty, were to be frankly explained honestly, even the young people, millennials who may not understand much else, would run as fast as their feet could carry them away from this. But they don't know, because it's not told to them. They don't understand. And
Right.
That's where we come in, I think, and you know, in an effort to try to convey what this is really about.
Well, absolutely. So look, the left controls academia, the left controls the education system. And, you know, I remember even when I was in academia teaching, the first year university students never heard of Lenin and Stalin. So this is not even taught in high school. It's a real tragedy what the American left has done to the education system. But look, Bernie Sanders wants to redistribute the wealth that American prosperity creates, that American capitalism creates. So these commies, they're very good at redistributing wealth. Now, technically, we know that's not true either, but, you know, in terms of what they're saying that they'll do. So they want to redistribute wealth, but they're not very good at creating wealth. We know that North Korea doesn't create wealth. We know that the Soviet regime and Castro's Cuba, etc., didn't create wealth at all. Rather, it led to economic devastation. Claire, tell us a little bit about why America and the American system has unleashed so much prosperity, the entrepreneurial spirit, the individual liberty, how all of this comes together. Why is America such a great success? And it's precisely that success that Bernie Sanders will crush if he gains power.
Well, because America is the place where, thanks to the brilliance of our founding fathers, who, by the way, if we go by the age definitions of today, a number of them were millennials. Thomas Jefferson was, 32 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, but they were light years ahead of where today's millennials are. And what they created for us in those foundational documents the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness does not mean guaranteed to you on a silver platter with a monthly debit card in your name. It means you have the right to pursue happiness to the best of your ability and your skills. But because our system frees that individual liberty, that entrepreneurial spirit, this country has created the most opportunity for the most people, probably in the history of the world. But unless you understand how wealth is created, again, by harnessing that very innate human acquisitiveness, ambition, even call it greed, but harnessed properly, it inspires the individual to the greater good, which contributes to all of society. Whereas to the opposite, if you don't inspire that, if you crush it instead, what you get is either that entrepreneurial spirit fleeing somewhere else, as we know, for example, in Venezuela, what is it? Something like 3 million or maybe even more Venezuelans have fled the country. Or those who actually did produce stop, because why? Why bother? It's just going to be taken away from you in the end anyway. And those who didn't have the ambition in the first place to produce, well, they're not going to be inspired anymore either if they're looking for and expecting a government handout. And so that's why eventually socialism always collapses. Human nature, it comes back to human nature. And capitalism, again, it has figured out a way to harness that human nature, but it must be, of course, within bounds, within proper regulation, consent of the governed regulation.
Absolutely. And, when we speak about human nature, what Marxists, of course, are so blind to is we know that humans are flawed and also driven by self-interest. And that recipe is one for disaster when Marxists think that they can create this utopia where, everybody will be, just sacrificing their own interests for the common good, which we know in communism, of course, the nomenclatura always arises. They also have their privileged class. Now, one of the deepest things here to understand, if that's a word I can use, but just one of the most central things here is that there cannot be a classless society without a terrorist component. Because when it comes time to take the farms from the kulaks, and maybe there are some farmers that don't want to give up their farm, you have to kill them. Can you speak on that a little bit, that a classless society cannot exist without a terrorist component?
Well, right. Again, this goes back to the human nature, and that the rights that were guaranteed to us in our Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and other foundational documents, which explain that governments exist among men to secure those inalienable rights and liberties. And without government by consent of the governed, that is established for the common good and to protect and defend those inalienable rights and liberties, there is the only other way that this can be imposed upon free-thinking, free-willed human beings is force and terror. And of course, that leads to monstrosities, death, and collapse of societies, as we've seen over and over and over again.
And they want to experiment with it over and over again. Claire, we're running out of time. I think one more important thing to mention is when we look at the 10 Commandments, we think about thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. And wow, what does Marxism do in terms of those commandments? Claire, let's finish with this. Where do you see, just before we go, where this race is going in terms of the Democrat? They're all in terms of what I see, they're almost all commies. Warren, Sanders. What do you make of how the race is emerging?
Well, however that turns out among that motley crew, I will tell you from speaking to American people, genuine, ordinary, everyday Americans across the country, they want nothing to do with any of that. They know where it leads. Even instinctively, they know where it leads. Let me leave you maybe with this book. I mentioned it when we were back and forth earlier. It is called The Naked Communist, written in 1958 by Cleon Skousen. Chapter 13 of this book explains how communists intend to gain control of our society, and mentioned in that chapter 13 are things like gain control of the schools, of the educational system, gain control of the teachers' unions, gain control of at least one of the major political parties in the United States, the Democratic Socialists of America, firm foothold within the Democratic Party. That is socialist, communist, Marxist ideology within the Democratic Party today. I think Americans will reject that. Whatever the Democratic Party does, it looks like quite a hash up at the moment, but the overall majority of the American people, I think, understand that that's not what they're looking for at all.
Claire, I hope you're right. It's just that Hillary Clinton and her speech the last time around at the convention, etc., that was straight out of Lenin and Stalin, and she won the popular vote. So I personally am a little bit not sure anymore how many Americans have been brainwashed, but I'm with you in the sense that we're hoping that there's a lot of Americans like you and I that know the truth and that will not vote for this disaster.
I agree, and I'm also hopeful, but I think, it depends on us getting through to our young people and our families, getting through in the general media, things like your program, and speaking out to let Americans know this is where this leads. This is where it goes. The street violence that we have seen and will see more of. Antifa is communist. It's not fascist. It's not brown shirts. It's black shirts. It's communist. Black Lives Matter movement was founded by communists. There was only a degree or two of separation between the Democratic Socialists of America, the Bernie Sanders and the other socialist candidates in this Democratic race, and those street thugs. People have to understand that's where it goes. That's where it leads to.
Absolutely. Claire, thank you so much for standing up for truth and for freedom and everything that you're doing in such a courageous and noble way. Where can people find you and support you?
Well, I am on Twitter in my name, Clare M. Lopez, at Clare M. Lopez. I'm on Facebook also in my name. I write and blog at Newsmax a couple times a month at least. I am also aligned with the Citizens Commission on National Security. That's the successor to the Citizens Commission on Benghazi. And finally, I work with Tom Trento and the United West.
Okay, fantastic. Claire, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for everything that you're doing, and we're 100% behind you, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thanks to you too.
And thank you for joining the Glazov Gang tonight. We'll see you soon. Good night.